We are really excited to get into the next portion of the research, and it is our political research. Back in, when we first commissioned this research back in 2017, right, we really looked at, we want to know what people in Congress, the White House, you know, the federal agencies, the places where we as tribal people, tribal nations have to constantly interact with, right, based on our federal trust relationship with the federal government, right, knowing that that is such an important space for us. And back in the initial findings back in 2017, we found that there was still, despite the big presence that tribes have on Capitol Hill and so many other places, that many people in Congress, for example, were really just talking about the profound invisibility that still existed for Native peoples and the level of ignorance, right, that a lot of lawmakers had about tribal nations. We saw there was a lot, we'll just say there was a lot of opportunities to make a big difference, right? But it's so important. It's really important how people in those key decision-making positions like think about us, understand us, do they understand tribal sovereignty and so many issues. And it was really a very important, like groundbreaking, like analysis. We are so excited, right, to be able to fund the next level of analysis to, you know, how far have we come in 6 years? So really excited to introduce this next panel. And the political research this time around has been led by Holly Cook Macarro and her company, The Angle. And it is going to be an incredible conversation here, and also in conversation with the ever wonderful Mark Trahant, who has become really so many things in Indian country, but somebody who's just been like an expert in really tracking how our political representation has been evolving and growing. This is going to be a really juicy conversation, and I've been given permission to say that they have nearly 100 years of political experience between the two of them. Their words, not mine. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ms. Holly Cook Macarro and Mr. Mark Trahant.
Good morning.
Live stream's on in the back for you.
We look great for being 100, right? That was a combined 100 years. Anin buju, Baganigijugo Quandijanakaz, Makwa Nindodem, Musquagami Rizgaganing, and Donjaba. My name is Hole in the Sky Woman, or Holly Cook Macarro. I'm from the Red Lake Band of Ojibwe in northern Minnesota. And I am so happy to be here today with Mark Trahant. I have a full PowerPoint that goes through the full report. Mark and I thought that it would be more interesting for all of you if I kind of went through the summary of the findings. We talked a bit. I'll go through just kind of the high level, and then we are going to chat and then take questions from you on it as well. So, Mark, did you have anything to open with?
I'm looking forward to the research.
Thank you. So, all right, and we got the hang of this here. This political research report is a bit different than I think what was drilled down on in 2017, 2018, and it's really focused on political engagement and advocacy. What we wanted to do was examine the visibility and how it's changed for Native Americans in the political arena, and also look at effective advocacy, from what those tools are, to what elected officials find most effective, to whether it matters if the advocates and that are representing tribes are Native American, whether it matters if they're Native American or not. So we have, I'm going into, I kind of did the introduction, did that. I'm going through who was interviewed. Now, my colleague, Mary Catherine Nagel, did the judicial piece of this. Our work, the political and judicial goes a bit hand in hand. Our scope of those that were interviewed was not in the thousands, which I think you saw the results of yesterday, but really very focused on those. For mine in particular, I interviewed a couple of dozen very targeted individuals, those who had a long view in the federal political arena and in the state, so that they could offer a perspective that they could talk about how it used to be, knowing that, and how that's changed, how it's changed since 2018 when we had a bit of a watershed election, and we've had momentous change since then. So the folks that I interviewed were executive level appointees in the administration, members of Congress, current and former, White House staff at the Domestic Policy Council, and White House staff that were in the Office of Public Engagement, or what was formerly the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, on both sides of the aisle, leaders of national Native organizations, assistant U.S. attorneys, local elected officials, statewide elected officials, and members of the indigenous media. All of these interviews were anonymous in order to allow those interviewed to speak freely. Excuse me. I want to look a little bit at what the 2024 landscape looks like in terms of running for federal office. Now, these numbers, and in here, when the full report is published, you'll see that I cited both a database that Mark Trahant has had going since 2018. Is it 2014? And I think I think he, you know, as the visionary that he is, he saw those floodgates opening and thought, let's track how many natives are running for Congress, whether it's local, you know, whether it's dog catcher or for Congress. So that database has been running for 2014. He asks us to, you know, add any names that he's missed, but he never misses a name. I also, a resource that I used was Advanced Native Political Leadership. I don't know if Jordan Haverhill is here or not, or any of the team there, but they put together an extraordinary bit of research on Native candidates. They both support and recruit Native candidates and have an exhaustive endorsement process that has become very meaningful, but they also do a great job of tracking and researching and supporting candidates across the country. So both of those were resources for me in looking up both historical trends and where we are now and where it looks like we're going to be in 2024. So in 2024, we have as of today, and this will change, not a whole lot. We are getting into the nitty-gritty of the 2024 election season, but 83 Native Americans are running for local, state, or federal office. That number is expected to rise to, when I wrote this was actually a few months ago, so that number is probably higher. We thought it was going to rise to 150 or 200 by the time the cycle was over. And when we look at what's next, I think we are going to continue, because of organizations like Advanced Native Political Leadership, which are supporting and recruiting and putting the I guess the support structure together, teaching people how to raise money, how to do messaging, how to position themselves and really provide, you know, the information about themselves. All those things for candidates that are so important. And so I think what's next in the landscape is just an increasing number of candidates. And that is what I found in talking, and I'm going to go into that, is that is the most important thing, is electing Native Americans to office. It's been the most impactful thing. That on-ramp that I talk about teaching Native Americans to how to run for office, all of these mechanics, they're so important because organizations like Emily's List, which they've done a lot for some Native candidates. They did a lot for Deb Haaland. They did a lot for Sharice Davids. But in order to get Emily's List to invest in a campaign, you've had to demonstrate a certain amount of money that you can raise. That is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when our Native candidates are running, it's often very difficult for them to reach that threshold. I had an experience in the last cycle as well, where it's Southern California District, Ken Calvert, who's a longtime member of Congress. He's been in 20 plus years, going on 30. Powerful member of the Appropriations Committee. But that district is changing from red to blue. And it's changing from red to blue because of brown people. And when I had a number of Democratic members of Congress, and I would say I'm a party girl, a Democratic party girl. I worked in the Clinton administration. I was the director of the Office of Native American Affairs for the Democratic National Committee, and that's the circle I run in. But in the last 2 cycles, I've experienced great frustration with our own party because of the lack of infrastructure left behind and a bit of a good old boy feel, both in a race I watched in Arizona and then in this race in Southern California, because I had these Democratic members of Congress calling me and saying, hey, you should meet this guy. His name is Will. And I said, well, and Will is a white former U.S. attorney who comes from the Palm Springs area, and I said, do we have any other candidates? Why this district is turning blue because of brown people? They said, well, he's the one who stepped forward. Well, his dad was a prominent attorney. He immediately had access, and his grandfather was an elected official. He immediately had access to the sort of resource, knowledge, and community that was going to allow him to step forward. And I said, well, we have to do more. And I say that just from my perspective. Everyone's party should do more, but I said, we have to do more as a party to support brown people in terms of getting them able to run for office. So I look at all of this. I tell you that because I think in the last 2 cycles, it really has been very frustrating for me. And one of the things that we have to do is build that infrastructure, because the most important thing, and the thing that has had the most impact in Congress and in the visibility and influence of Native Americans, is electing Native Americans to office. Which one is up there? Oh, it's not working. Oh, we have a glitch in the system. I can go through the summary of findings. Is it? All right, I'll let you guys try to fix that.
There we go.
On the summary, I'll go through a quick summary of the finding. A quick summary of the findings. I've gone through there we go. So I want to note that this, as I said, was a couple dozen folks who are familiar with Indian country, have that long perspective. I also think it'd be really interesting to do this sort of research on the 2/3 of the members of Congress who have no tribes in their district, yet vote on every piece of tribally related legislation, but that's a whole nother project. Of the ones that I did interview, 7 of them were elected officials. Of those, 4 had served in other elected positions, 11 of them had served as a political appointee on the federal level, and 8 had served as federally registered lobbyists. And that's important because of the perspective that we are going to go through. Did they get it to work? There we go. Which one is up there? Okay. So, as I said, in the Reclaiming Native Truth, the first one, it really revealed the depths of the invisibility of Native American society. We wanted to see what had changed since that had started, and really focusing on the political arena. We had an historic 2018 election. That election, for some reason, just really changed the vibe. We had Ben Nighthorse Campbell previously, we had others. We have Tom Cole, the very powerful and huge advocate and voice for us in the Congress that has done so much to create space and visibility for issues. But for some reason, the it was noted over and over that the profile, the work, and the voice of Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids had really advanced the visibility of Native Americans. Going on beyond that, the engagement with tribes really has become a regular course of business. And I thought that was really different when I got to Washington, D.C. in 1997 and working in the White House. It was really kind of a victory to even get a mention of tribes. And I think all of the work that has gone through, we demand so much more than that. One of the reasons that it was noted that our engagement and visibility has risen is the success of our tribal economies, which have spurred increased participation on our side, and that participation and engagement. And that's really a responsibility for us, too. We can't complain if we are not actually engaging, showing up, and participating. The impacts of that visibility is the influence on policy and legislation, the engagement with tribal leaders and advocates, consultation and collaboration. Part of that, the increased consultation is statutory, but that's part of the progress. It was a new thing in the late 90s when Clinton issued his executive order on consultation. It's been refined twice since by both Obama and Biden, and continues, I think, to evolve. Part of that because of the number of Native American appointees we have in the system that point out the best ways to do consultation with tribes. I talked a bit already about the election of Haaland and Davids. A huge piece of what we talked about and folks were really engaged with was the impacts of having Native American colleagues. And I was told an interesting story about, you know, I've watched, well, I'll tell the story first. It was another member of Congress who noted that when there was a federal recognition bill on the floor and the vote, there was a non-Native member of Congress who was trying to move this vote in a particular way, but without the sort of knowledge that was required to have make those arguments. Deb Haaland showed up and Sharice Davids, and they did a great job of educating a caucus and moved the vote in a direction that I think was beneficial to Indian country. And I've watched that happen. I've watched Sharice Davids do it several times in bringing that knowledge and swaying a conversation because of the experience and voice that she brings to the table. The opportunity, those that I interviewed, that when you have Native American colleagues, that the opportunities for engagement are very different. For instance, think about the opportunity that Secretary Haaland has as a member of the cabinet to speak to other members of the cabinet about policy issues. And when they have questions, they also have a resource to go to. You know, we have a farm bill that's pending. A lot of folks think that our, you know, the biggest bills that and policies that affect Indian country really only come out of Interior, but I would say the farm bill is probably the most comprehensive bill affecting all corners of Indian country. And the partnership between the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Interior, just over a number of administrations, always, I think that ends up being one of the strongest relationships because of the impacts of the Farm Bill and the programs that are housed in the Department of Agriculture. A state legislator that I chatted with said that the more state legislators there are that are Native American, and it makes sense, but the greater impact they have. They said it's great when if it's a lone voice, it's a very difficult place for that lone member to be from, but when there is a Native American caucus in a state, states like Montana, and I know Mark is going to talk about this a bit, Montana and others where there are a significant number of state legislators, it really is, you know, a force. They can sway votes and work as a single unit. On the tribal advocacy piece, this was really an interesting segment, and folks had a variety of responses here in terms of what was best, what are best practices, but they all noted that it has evolved along with the political sophistication of tribes. One thing that I really noticed is that the issue of tribal gaming used to be it was noted as the number one thing that had changed the way tribes are perceived and dealt with in Washington, D.C., always with the insinuation that it was just about the money, that we didn't, and I was resented that a bit because it meant that we didn't come to the table with arguments, substance, facts, or good reasons why we were at the table, that it was just because of tribal gaming dollars. In the course of these interviews, the topic of tribal gaming was an afterthought. And I raised that with a couple as I'd gone through about 2/3 of these interviews, and then I let a couple of them go, and I told them that, and they said, you know what? I didn't mention it either, did I? And I think that's a good thing. Certainly, tribal gaming should not be tarred with, I think, that sense that it was, and I really wish that we would have had the power back then, but the whole Jack Abramoff scandal, it left this taint on Indian gaming, like tribal gaming money was dirty, everyone should be careful. There was an entire, I think it went for 3 cycles, where it was okay to not take tribal gaming, to take money from tribes, which today would not stand for a minute. But back then, because of what happened with Jack Abramoff, and which highlighted some weaknesses, I think, in the system there, and certainly led to legislation that tightened up the reporting rules for lobbyists. That was a good thing, but I think at the end of the day, the black eye was left on tribal gaming. And that was in 2004, I believe, so here we are 20 years post Jack Abramoff, and tribal gaming has only grown. It's a $40+ billion industry nationwide. That money that is put into the political system has risen as well. We can sway votes. We can win special elections in major states. We can run ballot initiatives with the best of them in states like California and Arizona that's been successful. That's a level of political sophistication that is at the very highest levels of the game. But it's now, I think, expected. Tribes know what they're doing when it comes to tribal contributions. But it also, and this was one of the questions that I asked, and it was noted that tribes show up now with a team. They usually show up with folks who are doing communications. They usually show up with an advocate. They usually have an argument. And I have a quote in here, I'll look it up in a minute, but it was a former staff director at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs that said, they don't just show up to take the picture anymore. They want action, they want follow-up, there's substance to the meetings. No one is showing up just to take a picture with a member anymore. So, if I can't see the time, is there? I thought there was a time clock up here, so I'm not quite sure where we're at. Oh, there we go. In terms of effective tribal advocacy, I went through what those are. On the very last one there is the professional pipeline, and that is such a huge key into why tribes are more impactful now. It's not only that we have more natives in Congress, and that is just a fact. There's 5 or 6 when for so long we had 1 or 2 and it was such a celebration, but now it's just, de facto we have 5 or 6 each cycle. But behind that is the professional pipeline. And that is, I think, really why we have in this Biden administration more political appointees than we've ever had before. I got to Washington, D.C. in 1997, and there were maybe a couple dozen of us that were there. But we were all interns or first years at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs or the National Indian Gaming Commission or at the Department of Interior. And many of that class of us who arrived in Washington, D.C. together are either staff directors at the committee, are what Chris Stearns was there around the same time. I'm not sure if he's still here today. He's now an elected official here in the state of Washington. It's that pipeline, and that pipeline I think has grown of folks that are working in the agencies, that are working throughout the administration. And supporting that pipeline is really important in continuing to build our political effectiveness in Washington, D.C. Oh, it's not working again. So the voices of advocates that was really important as well. I asked, does it matter? Is it effective? If a tribal lobbyist or advocate is Native American, the answer universally was yes, given a foundational set of factors that they knew what they were doing, right? They knew the legislative process, they could provide the advice, they had the experience, but all things being equal, there's the fact that we know our own communities best, and we tell our own stories the best, and there is an inherent sense of when programs are working best on the ground in Washington, D.C. So that really was noted as being effective and an important, and I think the Native Americans that are interviewed that were elected officials, they took stock of when the advocates were Native American. A lot of the current issues that we went through were appropriations, environmental issues, public safety, the opioid epidemic, tribal gaming, economic development, language preservation, and sacred site protection. These are the issues that the elected officials said were coming in front of them the most. I really thought the answer to this question, just a simple question, where do you get your tribal news? The answer universally was Indian Country Today, and I think Indians.com, several of them noted the websites of national tribal organizations. Turtle Talk for all legal news is the go-to spot. There is no alternative. But after you went to Indian Country Today, and they might have named one other, it was really a very informal, they were like, well, people send me things, my friends send me this. And these were cabinet officials, these were high-level political appointees in the administration, and these were staffers on the Hill. I really thought it demonstrated that there's a space for tribal news, and that comes from a national place, and they really looked at some specific instances. So beyond that, I think we can, the conclusions that we had is I noted the professional pipeline. I think that things that we can do to continue to build on the engagement, level of visibility, and the effectiveness of our advocacy is to support the professional pipeline. And to do that, support internship and fellowship opportunities in Washington, D.C. I think demystifying it for our youth and others is really important in really building our indigenous political power, which at the end of the day is both voting and being part of the administration and at the table. So thank you. I think I went on a little longer than I meant to, Mark. I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. It's interesting to me that in this research, in a way, you're almost dispassionate rather than a participant. So I'm going to embarrass you as a participant. And I think we need to do a better job of telling the stories of how we got here. And one of those stories is that you were the first Native person to work at the White House in a policy role. And more important, after Holly Cook Macarro, that position has been forever. And I think that is so significant. You want to comment on that? Or?
I didn't know what I didn't know. I started out as an intern in in the Clinton White House, and I was going to be there for 3 months and then go to work for Senator Paul Wellstone. And at the end of that 3 months, they asked if I would stay on, so I stayed on for a little over another year. Then it was election time, so I went to the Democratic National Committee and became the director of the Office of Native American Affairs. But when I was at the White House, there was so much opportunity there that it surprised me what wasn't happening for Indian country. And we did, we have the Tribal Nations Conference now that started under the Obama administration, but really the first one was in the summer of 1998, and Mark Van Norman was the director of the Office of Tribal Justice. And Mark's great for not taking, no for an answer for anything. And so we managed to put together a economic development conference that is very much what the Tribal Nations Conference looks like now, where every member of the cabinet showed up. It spurred everyone to show up, and every agency and department to talk about what they were doing for tribes, much like what we see at the Tribal Nations Conference now. So it was such a huge and unique opportunity, and I had a great opportunity to visit with President Clinton at a state dinner last month, and he thanked me for the work I'd done for him, and I'd also worked on Hillary's campaigns, but I also thanked him for that opportunity back then to to be a part of an administration. I really did think that President Clinton cared about Indian country. I've met so many members over the years that they do all the right things, but maybe don't really have the heart for it. I think you guys have probably all met those same folks, those members who really do care. And it was a unique opportunity. Thank you, Mark.
When someone becomes a reporter, they usually check to make sure there's a gene inside of you that says you hate math. And somehow I didn't get that gene, and I always want to know what the math is. And so when you were going through the numbers, immediately I started to think about, what does parity look like? And what would it be if we actually had fair representation in Washington or across the board in the body politic? There are 435 members of Congress, of course, and 100 in the Senate. So that would be, at least if you use 2%, which is a very conservative number, that would be 8 members of Congress and 2 in the Senate. And of the 1,800 legislators, that would be 360. So you saw the numbers where there may be 150 to 200. It really shows the opportunity that's out there, that how small the entry level that's been made so far to get to where we need to be in parity.
And so we're at parity in the Senate, right?
Yeah.
And or wait, do we have 2 in the Senate, or are we down to Mark Wayne?
Just one.
Just one. For some reason, I was thinking we had 2. And in the House, that's pretty close. And we, in 2 of these, Sharice Davids runs from a district that is not in a huge reservation community. And her ability to continue to be elected in a race, she flipped that seat she didn't take an open seat from a Democrat, and that was a historically Democratic seat. She flipped that seat from a conservative Republican member of Congress to a blue seat as a Democrat. And every year they put her as a top target of the entire Republican Party. They run candidates against her. They've tried to enact legislation that would weaken her seat through redistricting. The level of opposition that Sharice Davids has fought off from the Republican Party, she's the only Democrat in the entire congressional federal delegation. And every state takes a class picture of their delegation every year, and it's almost comical to see the level of discomfort in that Kansas delegation picture. So,
well, and in terms of the story, and again, I think we need to get better at kind of telling these stories. In terms of the story, it really started with her outmaneuvering everyone in the Democratic primary and using allies like Emily's List to do that, because she was not supposed to win that primary.
No, absolutely not. That was a huge primary. And if some of you remember, Deb Haaland had been out like, I'm running for Congress in New Mexico for months by then, and everyone was very excited about that race. And then kind of early spring, Sharice started calling around and we're like, well, what is that about? But it was a crowded Democratic primary, and Sharice just outworked them. And to this day, the level of voter enthusiasm on the Democratic side for Sharice Davids, I went out to her and to spend the weekend before the election with her in the last cycle, and the number of people that showed up on a cold Sunday evening to go out and hang door knockers in multiple spots across town. There were 40 at like 3 different locations, and that's extraordinary, but that's the network that she has built. She's done all the right things, not just as a Native American running for Congress, but as a Democrat who reflects her district really well, and she has outperformed in spite of them targeting her as a top target and a seat that could be flipped. She has won by 9 points, and I think it was 12 points the last time. So she really is. I think they're going to give up soon, but she is a top target for the 3rd time this cycle.
The other lesson there, and I think it's really important for people to understand because it's probably our least understood power, is how potent the Indian vote could be in primaries. And it's never equaled that, at least in any race I've covered.
Yeah, I think that happens in a number of races across the country. And, when we see these states with jungle primaries, where we're going to have, I can't think of one where a Native person is involved. Is there a jungle primary with? No.
Washington State, California, there are not many states that do that.
No, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Just because there are so few voters, and if you get Indian country out, it could really sway those races. The other one I want to ask you about, and this is a little different, is next month they'll be having elections in the United Kingdom. And one, they do the whole thing in 78 days, which is just amazing to our system. But the other thing is, if you're standing as a member of the party in a UK election, you get a budget. If you run for the Congress in any party in this country, you have to say, this is what I'm going to raise. And the party says, if you raise that, we might give you some money. What can we do to think about the structure of elections?
Well, in terms of campaign finance, there is a fairly tight structure in terms of what each candidate can raise individually. The real weak spot is in the soft money, is in the independent expenditures, what labor unions and corporations are allowed to give outside of that. If you mean what can we do to strengthen the infrastructure of the
Reform.
Vote? I think there's a lot Indian country can do. One, we shouldn't be relying on the parties to do our work for us. We shouldn't be, and I'm guilty of this myself, but I always say, well, they don't leave anything behind. They show up the summer before, and they recruit some Native vote coordinators, and they put some folks in the field, and then we have some, literature, and it's usually in a very few targeted states, and then they leave. But we as I think our tribal elected leadership, our tribal governments, and then we as folks who see the value in building Indigenous political power through the vote, also have a responsibility to, let's do it ourselves. Let's not count on the parties, because that's a whole nother topic. And when Crystal and I were talking about that, would be great to dig into, is there real voter apathy in Indian country? There are real issues, around climate change, around Gaza, we talked a bit yesterday about this being the 100th anniversary of the Snyder Act, which I think is confusing a bit. It's not really the 100th anniversary of our right to vote. It's the anniversary of our citizenship. It was took several decades more for the right to vote to be enacted in every state across the country. It was in the early 70s, I think, when that finally became a fact across the country. So I think it'll be a while before we're celebrating where every Native American had the right to vote. And what we fight today is access to the ballot, which we are constantly under attack for.
This morning I went and was reading material that I'd written before Deb and Sharice and Peggy were in office, at least the offices they have now. And one of the things that a line I wrote was that if you want to see who the Indian country's Barack Obama is, look in the state legislatures, and that's when Peggy was in the Minnesota legislature. How important is that office for training for the next job?
Lieutenant Governor?
No, the state legislatures building their way up.
Oh, I mean, I think we could start at school board being, a great training spot. The school boards can often be extremely competitive, and that is where I think Peggy started on the school board, if I recall correctly, was her first elected position. But the state legislature is extremely important, and building the amount of money you have to raise is much less, the limits are less, but you still have to raise money, and I think it gets those skills turning. And so many, this is not as true anymore, but a decade ago it certainly was true. I said, there are like lineups in political parties and people who are waiting for specific seats, and they'll work within the network of the party, and so the party knows who's coming up next. And I said, not Indians. We just walk up and say, we're running for Congress, right? Not the school board, nothing else. They were going for and there was a real sense, I think, 15 years ago that all of Indian country should fund any Native Americans race for Congress, and I see much less of that now. I see folks who are climbing the ladder, who have served in state party positions, who have served in other positions, and and I think that's part of why we're seeing the success that we have now, that they're running for lower offices before they run for Congress.
We're going to go to audience questions, but I wanted to ask first that an unfulfilled treaty promise is to have delegates to Congress. I think at least 3 treaties have that provision. And when you look at other democracies around the world that have indigenous representation, what works is to have those slotted seats and then win other offices in addition to that. Would the delegates serve as that same purpose in the United States if we were able to get those seated?
Absolutely. I think, one, it would send a strong message about respecting the treaties they signed with tribal nations and living up to those provisions. Certainly there's been a concerted effort, and it's been a big learning curve on the Hill, but to see Kim Teehee, who's the delegate designee of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and I think that opportunity to have that voice at the table, and Kim would serve, to my understanding, much like the delegates from the territories, where she could serve and vote in committee, but she couldn't vote on the floor of the House. But just the fact that we would have a voice at the table, and as I noted in the results of my research, that every either staffer or elected official noted the huge impact having a Native American colleague with that sort of voice and presence and knowledge it makes a difference.
Great. We can take questions. While we're going to the mic, I was looking for stuff that I'd written earlier, and one was the coverage. I covered the enactment of the Indian Game and Regulatory Act. And the funny thing is, it was so long ago that it's not in any online archives. I've actually got to go to the library to look up what I wrote.
Okay. Hi, Kathy Wilson, Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I just had a comment in terms of you're saying that change the vote, and I totally agree with that. And we in South Dakota, for Tim Johnson, we changed that vote. However, there has been a lot of, I don't know if it's apathy or what, and I don't know how to get over that. In 2022, we really got out the vote in Oglala, Lakota County because we wanted Jamie Smith to beat Kristi Noem, and we also wanted Puri Puyer to win, and I don't know where Puri is, but she is right here, she is our representative from District 27 right now. But one of the things that we put a lot of work into that, and we could totally have changed that vote, and one of the things is that we had 99% of the vote for Jamie Smith. However, so we did our job and we got him in Oglala, Lakota County. But at the same time, our numbers were to actually getting to the poll was very low. And, you know, we really did a lot. We offered rides, all kinds of things. So I guess I don't know how you get over that apathy of getting people to vote so that we could make that big difference.
One story that I think has always stuck with me is I followed Denise Juneau when she was running for the House in Montana. And everywhere she would go, there'd be a line of little girls. And I keep thinking about what happens when those girls grow up and what they think about that race. And this was one where I think it was the first race where she raised all the money she needed. She really did everything she needed to do to win. It just, the tide was against her. But it showed that even though she lost, it opened up this real opening that allowed people to dream. And I think that's one way you get to that, beyond that, is to see candidates be run very professional campaigns and figure out kind of the metrics. And if you don't run, you run again.
Exactly. That's such a great example, Kathy, of in 2002 in the Tim Johnson race, the state of South Dakota went to bed thinking that he had lost, and his current
Larry Pressler.
Was it Pressler? No, in 2002 it was the
Oh, yeah, it wasn't, yeah.
the current senator, whose name I can't think of. But they went to bed thinking Tim Johnson had lost. And part of the reason is because in South Dakota at that time, they didn't count the votes on the res. You had to take the votes and you had to drive them off the res, and over 90% of the votes that came in were for Tim Johnson. And so when South Dakota woke up the next day, Tim Johnson was leading by 300 and some votes. But they also said, you know, what happens? And, you know, that tribal vote was kind of shady, right? And there was all the chatter about that. But the truth is, it was the structure of the way they treat the native vote in the state of South Dakota. But I think in terms of your question on the voter apathy, I think that it's part of what we need to do for infrastructure. If we have a year-round, you know, if tribes invest in having year-round, the native vote coordinator, right, which is not just in an election year, but that we have voter lists, that we are constantly, you know, if you go get your tribal ID, then let's also register you to vote. Then, you know, all of those sorts of things that are part of an infrastructure that we don't have on most reservations, and really begin to have a tribal infrastructure that turns out a vote that is not really beholden to any party. I really, I call it my dream, and building that sort of infrastructure on a national level with some coordination. It's a great question.
I have a question about, I think Red Lake is one of them, where the federal elections are the same time as the tribal elections. And I think across the country we saw a movement to join those two elections, and I'm wondering if that's moved the needle at all.
I really think it has in places. I believe the Navajo Nation has done that.
For a long time. And
there are states and places like the Navajo Nation where, you know, the sheer numbers can change races on the statewide level, certainly locally. And yes, I think it matters if you can go and turn out and vote for your, because most people will turn out to vote for their tribal election, right? I mean, technically we're not supposed to be able to complain if we don't vote, so if we're going to complain about our council, we got to vote. And so yes, absolutely. I think that I haven't seen as much energy behind that. There's certainly, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, surely we saw a lot of movement towards that. It seems to have lost some energy, but yes, it makes a difference.
I remember the first time I was told about turnout, it was food and transportation. Yeah. And if you can do those two things, that you can get more people out, and they do a lot of that for tribal elections, that's for sure. Back here.
Neith Mikesky, good morning. Aini Manaimama, Wanasha, Alyssa Macy, Tananawit, Wasco Navajo, Hopi, Shitai Kiniashwa, Good morning. My name is Alyssa Macy. I'm a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Oregon, and there's two of me on this echo. I serve as a CEO of Washington Conservation Action, and one of our programs that we've been developing here in Washington State is Native Vote Washington. And one of the things that I was drawn to in this work was the fact that we have multiple tools to use. So I started out in 2003 doing democracy work from a C3 framework, and now run Native Vote as a C3, a C4, and having our own PAC. So we are pulling all the levers here in the state of Washington and learning some really interesting things, but also really engaging with other efforts across the country. So I really encourage us to link our efforts together, because none of us have enough resources to do all of this in a really permanent way. And so as we connect the dots with our work, we build the strength that we need to continue in year-round efforts. So we built Native Vote Washington off of the back of an environmental organization and kind of use the resources and our donors to fund it, and now are really making it a permanent program here in the state. So I just wanted to say that hearing about the research, about what you are all doing, we have also done a lot of polling here in the state, and we're finding some of the same things. So it's like a real validation, again, of the strength of tribal leadership, especially in the climate space. And certainly, I want to lift up the work of Advanced Native Political Leadership, because I have been working with them to just build out the database of who's in office here in Washington State. So just encourage you to reach out to folks and put your data somewhere where we can all take a peek at it, because I am one of those folks that love numbers and data and polling and really enjoy learning from others. We have at Native Vote Washington an effort called Voting is Good Medicine, and we've been meeting once a month virtually with anybody from across the country to talk about what we're learning in the field. So if you're interested in joining, Native Vote Washington is the website, and we're happy to talk to folks. If you're just getting into this work, I've done a lot of field work in Indian country, which has been fun, and just really excited about the power that we can all bring to this effort. So here in Washington State, we've got 5 candidates running this year. We have 2 incumbents. We have our first Native person running for a statewide race, and it's been a little disheartening with some of the party politics about wanting our first person who is running for a statewide office to step back for other folks. So I'm navigating the politics of that, but we're really excited to see. His name is Patrick DePoe. He's from Macaw. He's running for Commissioner on Public Lands. The CPL role has oversight of our Department of Natural Resources, so it's a really key elected position for tribes in the state. But it's exciting to see that happening. So if you don't know about him, Google him, support him, share his information, because it's these types of efforts bringing visibility to Indian country. And in Washington State, I came here and was drawn to the politics of tribes and the leaderships of tribes here. So it's just been really fun to see that. So I'm just also want to say I'm so proud of Crystal and the whole Illuminative team. This is the type of work that we have been wanting for decades, to be able to validate what we already know in Indian country. So it's exciting to be here with so many of you, so many young people. I just feel tremendously inspired.
Thank you, Alyssa. You said there were 2 of you on the mic. I wish we could continue to replicate you across the country. That's a great point. You know, the data and having the numbers behind our arguments is part of what has changed. You know, and Crystal's vision of doing this all those years ago has really allowed us to put data behind the arguments we'd long been making, and it's part of what, you know, this political research and having these conversations about what has changed, what's effective, and it was just really fascinating. I would tell everyone, I've just got a few questions. It's not going to take more than 30 minutes, but everyone wanted to chat, wanted to talk about this, and it would be an hour later.
Well, one thing I would want to mention about Washington, because the context I think is so important, is that it's hard to say how far Washington has come because it's unbelievable. When I started writing about Washington state politics, we would always use a clause that said the Mississippi of Indian country. And the relations were so bad that there was just no chance. And one of the things that changed it was a ballot initiative 456, that basically said Washington state would no longer believe in treaties. And the tribes were very smart about it, and they hired a Republican to lead their campaign, a guy by the name of Gummy Johnson, who had been the chair of the Republican Party. And they led a very sophisticated campaign, but that laid the groundwork for the defeat of Slade Gorton. It laid the groundwork for a lot of the things that came later. And it really was a very broad view of how to move people in a state that's now very progressive and has great relations with tribes. It just didn't happen overnight. It was a long process, but one that was very well thought out and executed. Do we have time for one more?
Petuashte. I am Representative Pri Puyer. I am in the South Dakota House of Representatives. I represent District 27, which is 5 counties and the home of the Oglala Lakota Nation and the Pine Ridge Reservation. I just want to add to the conversation and to everybody in this room. First, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be a guest on your land. Whenever Senator Johnson won, he pumped in a lot of money into our reservation, and it was a force multiplier. We were able to get, we were able to pay for gas. We were able to pay for, and I'm saying we as in my people. I wasn't there. I was my first year of college during that time, but I listened to our elders speak of that time, and they really felt valued by the Democratic Party because they poured in so much money, so much resources to get the vote out. And our Lakota people don't disappoint. When you ask for our help, we show up and we help. We have very limited resources. We are all heart. But in this day and age, money tells you where your value is in a relationship. So moving from that time, I was elected in 2018, and I'm currently in my 3rd election cycle. I've been honored to serve my people for 6 years in the South Dakota House. And I will tell you, it's my people that deserve the thanks, but thank you. My people are very firm in their beliefs and their values. But, Governor Kristi Noem has really taken a mainstream stance of being an adversary against Native communities. A lot of people don't know that she ran against Billy Sutton, and she was 11,000 votes. She won by only 11,000 votes, and those 11,000 votes were in Indian country. They were in one county in Indian country. Out of the 9 tribal reservations, tribal nations, they were in one county. Billy Sutton did not have the same type of value of the Indian vote. But had we been able to band together and say we don't need a major party to show us they value us, had we took it upon ourselves and said to ourselves, no one's gonna come and save us, it's up to us to save ourselves, we would have stopped Kristi Noem for having the national platform that she is. She was on the short list for Donald Trump. and she has made herself an enemy. So we could have stopped that from the whole national stage getting to experience the threat that she poses to Indian country. So that is one of the reasons I just want to add to the conversation, that it may be an issue in your community, but it works to the greater whole. You could be voting for your whole people across Turtle Island. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Holly.
Mark, Holly?
Crystal, can that be our next research project on what kind of structures we have, right? We hear that description, but it's amazing. And like I said, I call it my dream, and having a national structure like that.
And
Thank you.
Holly, we're actually going to end with one virtual question. As tribes represent the 8th largest economic entity, post-gaming, what are the top industries that policymakers see representing tribal enterprise?
That's an interesting question. I would say that the section, the 8A contracting is a big issue that they are seeing and have a role in, and so that may be why they see that. But the rise in 8A contracting in tribes has been tremendous over the last couple of decades as well. I think they see the expansion around a gaming industry and the hospitality industry and the investments that in that same vein were the references that I got. I don't know where I'm looking here, but the there wasn't a lot of specificity. I think I heard 8A only because they have a role in the administration of that program. It's a great question.
We could easily go on for some time, but unfortunately, Mary Catherine Nagel is waiting to talk about tribal sovereignty and the courts. So thank you very much to Holly Cook Macarro.
Thank you so much.